very thoughtful and insightful land acknowledgement. I'd like to welcome everyone and thank you for being here. Welcome to our second grad talks of the year. As Nancy said, these are topics that bring up questions where there's no real obvious answer to, but makes you think about things. So this topic on whether a postdoctoral fellowship is for you or in your future is an important one as a graduate student, and it made me reflect on my journey and my thought process. I will say that it's never too early to plan, to think about and plan for your future. And often, through experience, I found that, and most people find that what you plan for isn't always what you'll end up doing. But having that plan gives you some direction and something to work towards, and I think that's very important. So when I went into grad school, it was a little bit by accident. I sort of got an opportunity to be an undergrad RA because of a classmate of mine in undergrad who was doing an RA in the summer and didn't want to continue doing it in the fall and winter, and didn't want to leave that professor high and dry, and so asked me if I'd be interested. So I took it because it was just more money as an undergrad student. I wasn't really thinking about what's next, and I was in fourth year of undergrad. So while doing that RA, the professor encouraged me to go to the graduate program's open house. And again, I wasn't really thinking about grad school. I actually had a job lined up, but I went, and it really opened my eyes to what grad school could be, and it was quite exciting. So I decided to apply, and I was lucky to get an admission into that. And I went in there really wanting to become a researcher, an academic, and a professor. And so I went in, did my master's, tried to get into my PhD as soon as possible, got into my PhD, and a story a lot of us can relate to. Halfway through my PhD, I was really frustrated about everything that was going on. Saw my supervisor spending all their time pushing paper, as I saw, and working on grant applications and having a low success rate. And I was like, this is not for me. I thought I'd like it, but it's not for me. And so a postdoc wasn't on my mind, and so I really wanted to go into industry. Finished my PhD, applied to many industry jobs, and got really put off by the lack of any engagement from any application I gave in that I submitted. I did come across an industry application that was in a research lab, and I applied for it and got called for an interview, but with the caveat that they would interview me for a postdoc position and not the scientist position. So I said, no, thank you. I'll only come for the scientist position interview. And they said, sure. And so I went and interviewed, and they offered me a postdoc, right? So, but anyways, again, it opened my eyes to the postdoc, and it was a good postdoc, and it was quite interesting. I did my postdoc, and then a faculty position came my way, and it was lucky timing, and here I am at TMU. So the postdoc was a very integral part of me getting to where I was, but again, it was an opportunity that just fell on my lap. I really didn't plan for it. But in hindsight, I think it would have been good for me to do some of this, thinking about and investigating what a postdoc could mean. So good on you for being here. I think we have three excellent panelists here to reflect on their journey, and that can give you some insight as to what a postdoc could mean for you. So we have from industrial engineering, Professor Alia Alnaga. We have from psychology, Dr. Erin Cortis, a postdoc research associate at the CARE Lab. And we have Ashley Jane Lewis, an alumna of TMU and a postdoctoral fellow at the Creative School. So I'd like to welcome them and thank them for being here. If you were in person, we'd do a round of applause, but it's kind of awkward on Zoom. So thank you for being here. I also want to thank Simone, Leslie, and Nancy for all their hard work in putting this together. So thank you for always doing a great job with these with grad talks and several events. I will remind you that this session does count towards the grad skills passport.
Future Smart.
Future Smart.
Future Smart. Thank you. Future Smart passport. So reach out to Leslie Mutic, our graduate student engagement officer, who will be happy to provide you with more details. Do stick around. There is after the panel, there is a chance for a Q&A session. I think that's where you'll get a lot of value from this session. So I hope you enjoy it. Thanks for being here. I do have to run after this, but I'll pass it on to Dr. Nancy Walton to introduce the panelists in more detail. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Carl. And we're glad that your journey led you here. The conclusion of that is you just never know where your journey will take you. So learning as much as you can about possibilities and hearing about other people's narratives, I think always helps us kind of think about what we want. So Carl, thank you for introducing our three amazing women. What we have here are all-women panel at GRADTalks, which makes me very happy. Ashley Jane Lewis is one of our inaugural recipients of the TMU Postdoctoral Fellowship for Black Scholars. She's a new media artist, creative technologist whose work focuses on interactive installations, bioart, which I've been reading about now, Ashley, social justice and speculative design. Her artistic practice explores Black cultures of past, present, and future through computational and analog mediums, including coding and machine learning, digital and physical fabrication, science, data weaving, microorganisms, and live performance. Erin Cortes is a postdoctoral research associate working with the Clinical Addictions Research and Equity Lab here at TMU. She received her PhD in experimental psychology from the University of Ottawa in 2023, and her research looks at how people's interpersonal experiences shape and are shaped by technology, and is driven by, again, a strong commitment to social justice. We see a theme here. And Dr. Cortes also conducts research that centers 2SLGBTQ+ experiences in various contexts. And finally, Aliyah Alnagar. Aliyah is an assistant professor in our mechanical industrial engineering program at TMU. She was an NSERC-funded postdoctoral fellow at the Rotman School of Management at the University of Toronto in 2022, after completing her PhD at the University of Waterloo. Applying mathematical optimization and probability theory, Aliyah's research informs new tools, algorithms, and policies that enable organizations to make creative and innovative decisions when facing complex challenges. We have three fascinating women with us today, so I'm going to talk less, and we want to hear from them. And first, I'd like them each, I gave a brief introduction, I'd like them to give their own introduction, an overview of their career, of their research, of their trajectory to date, and their academic journey and where they are now. And let's start with you, Ashley.
Sure, yeah. Thank you for that introduction, Nancy. And yeah, so much gratitude to the Black Scholarship Institute for making this inaugural Black Fellowship possible. I see Dr. Grace Camille is here. She does incredible work, and I'm very lucky to be a recipient of the fellowship. Yeah, so my focus in this postdoc is to explore other ecologies, specifically slime mold, to investigate ways that we can draw wisdom from this organism to fortify the Black community. This is an organism that, I mean, like, if I could show you, maybe just like I'll just like rest on this image, because I don't know, I didn't ask Nancy if I could share my screen, but I'm just gonna show. I won't show any slides, just so that you have context for what I'm talking about. This is slime mold. This is the organism that's the center of my research, an organism that displays qualities that resemble mutual aid, qualities that resemble like equitable nutrient sharing, qualities that resemble oh, sorry, can you not see it, Nancy?
It was there, and now it says it's loading.
Okay.
It was beautiful for a moment.
Okay, I'll try one more time. As I talk, qualities that resemble mutual aid. It has qualities that resemble equitable distributions of nutrients, and also societal practices that I think we could gain in order to be more tolerant of different identities, different sexual experiences. This organism also is phenomenal because it has no centralized brain, but it does retain memory. And Black scholars, largely led by myself and one other in Brooklyn, have been using this as an example of ways of holding on to cultural preservation in obfuscation. So how you pass on information outside of the view of major oppressive structures. And this is research I've been working on for the last 7 years in various artist grants at various institutions, and have had the privilege of being able to focus on since starting this postdoc about 1.5 years ago. So my work is a little bit of science, but I'm an artist and technologist, so I build technology that helps take a closer look at organisms of this nature. And my research results in outputs that are creative and artistic, aiming to unite conversations in the Black community.
Wow, thank you, Ashley, and a pretty compelling image to go along with that. Thank you so much. Erin, please go ahead.
That's so tough to follow, Ashley. That is so cool. So I'm in psychology. So I finished my PhD just about 1 year ago, I guess. So not long. Throughout my PhD, I focused on psychology. So my research in my PhD focused on what I call technology-mediated sexual interactions, which includes things like sexting, cybersex, and phone sex, and specifically how people's motivations for engaging in those activities can improve relationship and sexual satisfaction in the context of committed romantic relationships. Throughout my PhD, I would say I dabbled quite a bit. So I also worked with some other professors looking at emojis and how emojis can impact, when we use them, our perceptions of other people. So sometimes emojis make us think people are warmer and more friendly, but they also can make us think they're less competent, for example. And then I also did some work with researchers outside of my home institution, so outside of the University of Ottawa. Throughout, it was kind of a fluke, but during the COVID pandemic, I had reached out to another researcher, Dr. Karen Blair, who works at Trent University, because she was doing a really large daily diary study looking at how COVID was impacting people kind of throughout those early months of the pandemic. And through that, we got a lot of really interesting data specifically focused on the 2S LGBTQ plus experience, which was really important to me and really important to Karen because that was part of the pandemic that people weren't really examining. And that sparked my interest in sort of focusing on the 2S LGBTQ plus population in future research and in my current postdoc. Coming to my postdoc, I think it's probably worth mentioning and probably the most interesting in some ways to say, while I was doing my PhD, I did a lot of side work as well. So mostly because I needed money. I did have scholarship funding, but scholarship funding is not a lot of, it's more now, but it wasn't very much at the time. So I worked a little bit in nonprofit. I did some work for the federal government, and those were really useful experience. And I also taught a lot of undergraduate courses. So I was doing a lot of teaching contract work, which made my PhD more difficult, but it also meant that I could live. But throughout those experiences, I also started kind of ruling out work that I didn't want to do. So I kind of learned that nonprofit was really tough and not really a place that I wanted to be long term. I learned that the federal government wasn't really a place that I wanted to be long term. And I did learn that I really liked teaching and I consistently really enjoyed research. So the opportunity for the postdoc came up. I actually saw the ad for this postdoc on Instagram. I kind of fluked into it as well. I applied and I got it and moved to Toronto from Ottawa. So I started here about 6 or 7 months ago. So kind of a lot of research interests and a lot of sort of ruling out jobs outside of academia that made me sort of say, okay, well, I guess we'll keep going with academia for a little while.
Great, thanks, Erin, and also a little bit of happening upon things, as we're seeing, can actually be a theme. Aaliyah, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you also, Ashley and Aaron, for their nice introductions. So I'm an assistant professor in industrial engineering. So I guess like the type of work I do is quite different than the work that Aaron and Ashley do. So essentially, I work in the area of decision making under uncertainty. So you can think of, for instance, everyone hears about data analytics now. This is like a branch of data analytics that focuses more on the prescriptive analytics. So essentially, once you have the data, whatever the application is, what do you do with this data? Like, how can this inform decisions, especially when you don't really have very high confidence in that data, right? So this is where the uncertainty component comes in play. How do you manage this uncertainty and make good decisions despite this uncertainty? So this is kind of like the broad area of my work. And then I do a lot of different applications. So I have some applications in transportation and sharing economy, also in healthcare. So for example, in some of the applications in the sharing economy that I'm looking at, and I also started looking at that in my PhD, was so like one of the criticisms of sharing economy platforms is they don't really protect their workers, right? So the workers there are independent contractors, so they may end up earning less than minimum wage, right? So for instance, how do you build algorithms that can ensure that the platforms still operate profitably, but have some kind of wage protection or utilization protection for workers, right? So these are all like problems that are motivated by real world applications with some of which have some societal impact. But essentially now, once you translate them into the math, then there's like a lot of work that like how do you model this mathematically? How do you design good algorithmic solution methods so that you can actually solve these problems, especially for realistic sized problems, right? So when we're talking about, for instance, employing this algorithm over like say over the Toronto area, then now we're talking about a very large handling large data sets, solving problems in real time, and so on. So there are a lot of like technical issues that come in that from that perspective as well. Yeah, so I guess this is kind of like the type of work I do. At TMU, I'm teaching like courses related to operations research, which is part of the methodologies that I use. Also related to data analytics and machine learning. And I have a course that I'm teaching in service operations management, which is like an applied course that combines multiple methodologies that students learn in industrial engineering. Yeah, this is kind of like a brief introduction. I guess once we start talking more with other questions that Nancy prepared, I guess like I'll be able to share more about like how I got to where I am now. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaliyah. I think given the world today, it's very encouraging that folks like you are doing research on uncertainty. It's encouraging to hear. So thank you all for those introductions. All three very compelling stories in terms of the work you're doing, the impact you have. For each of you, how did you decide that a postdoc was right for you? So what were the kinds of factors that influenced your decision? Was it a purposeful decision you made, like an actual explicit decision-making process, or did you happen upon it? So what factors were important and how did you make that decision? And I'm going to start with Aaron first.
Yeah, I guess I sort of got into that a little bit. For me, I started looking for a postdoc in earnest, and I didn't really get very far in that search. I applied for the first one I saw and got it. But I was kind of in between. I had just finished my PhD. I was teaching a couple of courses at the University of Ottawa, and then I was also working a full-time job with the federal government, while also kind of trying to maintain some of the research that I had started in my PhD and wanted to wrap up. So that was a lot that I was doing all at once, and it was really what I wanted to do and what I had the least amount of time for was research. at that point. And so I had been talking to a lot of mentors and supervisors and kind of saying like, oh, I really want to do all this research, but I don't have time. And so they kind of were like, well, you know, the best thing to do then would be a postdoc. And so that was pretty much where I got to. I knew that I wasn't too picky about postdoc opportunities at the time. I knew that I wanted to focus more so on something that was oriented towards social justice, because that was important to me. It still is important to me at the time. And I also wanted to ensure that the postdoc would be building skills that I didn't already have. So yeah, I came across my current postdoc where we're focusing on looking at transgender and gender diverse people's experiences with alcohol and smoking, and how to sort of improve the factors that relate to those, like when those behaviors are problematic, to help lessen the problematization of them. And we're also doing a lot of statistical analyses that I didn't have a lot of prior experience with. So it kind of checked all the boxes, and yeah, and it just came at the right time, and I applied and kind of fell into it. So a couple of different factors, but the key one was that I knew there were still skills that I wanted to build and didn't have. And I still wanted to kind of continue with research and see if, you know, see where that path takes me. I don't know if it's going to be staying in academia or not, but it was kind of the right fit for right now.
That was going to be my question too, is how much did that factor into your decision? The fact that you wanted to expand your toolbox or expand your skill set and competencies, and this really ticked those boxes. Yeah.
Yeah, very much so. So I think, you know, I think there could have been opportunities to do a postdoc with people that I was already working with. And that would have been nice too. I would have taken those opportunities as well. But it was, I think, the better push for myself to do something new. So more learning and more growth that way.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Erin. Aaliyah, now you've finished your postdoc, but in thinking back to that time when you were in your PhD, thinking about what to do next, can you talk a little bit about that decision-making process?
Sure, yeah. So maybe I'll take a step back, I guess, to kind of give a little bit of context. So, you know, like after I completed my undergrad, like I was very excited to go like work in industry, right? And then I did. I worked at a consulting firm for 3 years, and I learned a lot there, but at the same time, I felt that I really was lacking the technical skills that I really enjoyed during my studies. So this was like kind of like the trigger for me when I decided to join grad school in the first place, right? So I felt like I really enjoy doing more technical things, like, for example, part of the work that I do is mathematical modeling. I really enjoyed that, and I only took like a couple of classes on that in undergrad, and I felt like I want to do things that are more technical. I don't you know, like that I didn't see myself there in the long run. So then like when I started doing my master's and then PhD, I felt that I found like a field that I really enjoyed, and I felt like I really want to dig deeper into it. And even after my PhD, there was still a lot of things that I wanted to learn, a lot of new questions that I wanted to explore. So it was really I feel like the question of like whether to continue in academia or leave to industry, it's a very personal question, and it really is differs from one person to another, and like what they want, what they aspire to accomplish, and like how a good life looks from their perspective. But I think like one of the like I didn't ever feel like there's only like one good path, but I feel like the path to postdoc or the path to academia is kind of like playing, you know, like a hot and cold game. You know, those games when we play as kids, when you hide something and then someone tells you whether you're getting closer or getting farther. So it really feels a lot like that, right? So when you do, when you so for example, I know some people who did some work in their PhD that they didn't really resonate with them, right? So this is kind of a signal that maybe this path is not right for you, but maybe it's not the PhD itself or the postdoc itself, maybe it's just the research area, right? So I guess like as you're growing, you're kind of collecting those clues as what is something that you're appreciating and what is something that's not really for you. And for me, like I guess like the decision to do a postdoc was very simple because I knew that I wanted to pursue academia after that. So it was really a matter of like getting a good postdoc that would open up doors for me after I complete the postdoc. And also, like as Erin mentioned, like building skills that I didn't really have much of like during my PhD so that I can build a stronger resume.
Thank you, Leah. I love your comment about what a good life looks like. So we often focus very much on the career path, our career path, and it almost feels separate from thinking for ourselves about what a good life looks like, and planning sort of holistically for ourselves as people who do more than work, are often defined by our work, but thinking about how that fits. So thank you for that. Ashley, please.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing, that I really love that frame of mind when making large decisions. I wrote it down to continue to sort of help center future decisions as well. In terms of what made this particular postdoc feel right, you know, in some ways, and this is obviously a joke, but is it? In some ways, I feel like I manifested this postdoc. I think I was coming out of a degree at NYU, and I had stayed in New York to do some research, and I'd recently come back to Toronto, and was really trying to work on my research in the nooks and crannies of other work. So within other researchers' work, well-funded researchers, I was able to like sequester a little bit of funding to work on like my specific research. And then of course, like after hours at different like teaching jobs and positions. And it never felt like there was enough time. And coming back to Toronto, I remember saying to a colleague who ended up being my supervisor for this postdoc, I remember telling him how frustrated I was that it consistently seemed to be the universities in the States, particularly in progressive states, were offering postdocs that were centered on a particular kind of identity and their research. So there were a lot of like Black postdocs and a lot of Indigenous postdocs, and that there was a camaraderie that was felt amongst a community that was there to support their work and cherish and value that perspective. And I was frustrated that I hardly saw versions of that in Canada. And then I swear, like 2 months later, I saw the announcement that the Black Postdoctoral Fellowship was opening their first call for proposals. So obviously I didn't manifest this. I'm sure this is a manifestation of the Black Scholarship Institute, but I feel like I did because it was something I was really lamenting on. And so it was a natural inclination to apply, because I had been hoping for a space that was not only going to allow me to do my research, but also wanted to build this network of Black researchers at an institution. So yeah, it was an obvious opportunity. And I'm really grateful to my supervisor, David Gauntlet, as Canada Research Chair, for seeing the value in supervising this work. Of course, he's an ally. He's not a Black researcher, but I appreciate the reality that in institutions you often need allyship to make these things possible. So that was also really meaningful, and I think a large factor in making it possible to apply for the postdoc.
Thanks, Ashley. I'm glad you manifested this. I actually really like that. I want to jump to the next question with you, just to follow up your because you've just really described such an interesting journey. What do you see as your next steps after your postdoc, and how are you feeling that the experiences you're gaining there are leading you to that next step? Yeah,
I have so many different versions of this answer. I think I'm going to pick two and try to stick to those. I'll make one of them really short. I've been working in academia for a very long time. Most of my career has either been in the arts or academia or the academic arts, some combination of those of those fields. And in terms of next steps, I mean, this opportunity, this postdoc has been the first time where I've actually felt like I can occupy space in academia, because again, this incredible network of largely Black female researchers has demonstrated a pathway forward. I'm seeing now for the first time multiple definitions of what it looks like to be a Black researcher in academia. And this is something I was kind of concocting in my head prior to that. There was very little representation of that at NYU. I've taught at OCAD and Humber College, and of course, I've taught at TMU for a while, on and off between living in the States and in Canada. And again, at least in the arts and the technological arts, very, very little representation of Black academic work. And a pathway forward to me has been opened by the visibility of these multiplicitous definitions of Black academic work. And so, this is not just demonstrated through Grace Camille's work, who I, of course, mentioned earlier, but like Annette Bailey, and there's so many spectacular women who have been a part of this ecosystem, and each event that I go to has like put on my radar a different type of research and a different way to navigate the academic system. So prior to the postdoc, I was thinking, I would love to stay in academia. I'm trying to recognize how that might feel as a career in tribute to Aaliyah's, like, what kind of life do you want? I was also thinking about, pursuing directorship or associate directorship positions at arts institutions. But now, a year and a half into the postdoc, I do feel like very comfortable in my skin in an academic space. And I think it would be excellent to try to continue to pursue faculty positions. That's the objective at the moment.
I see Grace Camille giving you the applause for that, as we all are. That's great. And thank you for sharing what you just shared. It's really important for us to hear and take in and learn, particularly about allyship. So I really appreciate that. Erin, your next steps, you sort of talked about what brought you to the postdoc and how you felt it sort of filled out this set of competencies that you wanted to have. What do you see as the next steps, knowing that it's not going to be a not-for-profit, it's not going to be in government, because that you tried that out and it's maybe not the right thing. So what are your next steps?
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm a little, I'm still sort of in the brainstorm phase. If I think, Aaliyah, you're a guiding star here with the what is a good life question. I think I'm still figuring that out for myself a little bit. So I do, I think everyone's experience of academia is different. I know in psychology, if there's folks in psychology here, there is and in other, I'm sure all disciplines are the same in some way on this respect, but there is a very strong drive to produce. So I've seen a lot of academics burn out in the last 2 or 3 years, and that worries me. So I think for me, academia, if it works well, I think if you're at a healthy institution with colleagues that you like and with sort of maybe a manageable work-life balance, then yes, academia looks really good to me. I love research and I love teaching. Both of those things are in academia. And I haven't tried out hardcore industry. So that is also something that I'm open to trying, kind of postdoc, if that's the next step, or if an academic job kind of manifests for me. I'm going to borrow some of Ashley's manifestation there, but if so, I'm open to industry, I'm open to academia. What concerns me about academia is frankly the pressure that goes along with it. And so I'm still sort of wrestling with whether or not I would be able to maintain a reasonable work-life balance in that space. And so I hope that Aaliyah talks about that in her answer.
Yeah, and I want to actually recognize something quite unique, is that a lot of our postdoctoral scholars, our grad students, are talking about work-life balance. I don't remember talking about it as a grad student. I don't remember there being space to open that up. So I think your shared wisdom, you bring something to this in the sense of opening up those discussions that really were either they were silent or behind closed doors, or just two people talking. They weren't discussions about thinking about what it means to have a good life, work-life balance. So Aaliyah, a little bit of a different question for you because you've done your next step, but a couple of things. One is you talked about, like Aaron, looking for different things, different skills and competencies as part of your postdoc. You also said, I knew I was going into academia, so I did the postdoc. Do you think that postdoc was important / necessary in your area to get an academic position? Were those skills and competencies important and necessary for you to then have either more confidence or a different set of skills in applying for faculty positions?
Yeah, thank you, Nancy. Well, I think like this is probably shared across different fields, but the academic job market is getting more and more competitive, like by the year. So I think having a postdoc definitely helped. Although I only stayed like so I applied for this position the year I started my postdoc, and I only stayed for like a year and 4 months in my postdoc. So it wasn't really a very long postdoc, and I was also very lucky to get this position. But I think in general, like because of how competitive the market has become, they're always looking for, like knowing, kind of like diversifying your expertise, having, of course, better publications, having a stronger network, right? So these are all things that essentially a postdoc helped me with, right? And I think like one of the main things with a postdoc is it really does give you time to like imagine how it's like to be a faculty member, because essentially you mostly do just research in postdoc, but it takes away the pressure of like completing, of course, for instance, a PhD. You have to have like a thesis that's somewhat cohesive, right? So you need to work in like different, basically all the different parts of the PhD kind of have to be grouped together in a logical way. But in a postdoc, you really have more flexibility to explore like wider areas, to really reflect on what you want to do in the long run. Maybe explore like maybe take even some high risk activities, right? So maybe explore areas that may not necessarily directly lead to publications and so on, but because you're not like under the pressure of like a 10-year clock and so on. So you have this time to really do a little bit of exploration and learning, and these skills can all help you later on when you're applying for faculty positions. So like definitely, I think the point that Aaron raised before, like with work-life balance, this is definitely like a challenge, right? So it's a challenge for I guess junior faculty across different fields. But there is a lot of good advice out there that like with respect to time management. So there's a professor called Cal Newport. He writes some very nice books about like thriving as like even like as a student. He talks a lot about managing like digital life and like ensuring that you don't really get sucked into all the time wasting, distracting digital life, and also how to kind of work in depth and high levels of concentration that can help you produce like good output in a shorter amount of time. So it may sound like a long stretch, but I think some of the advice that like I got from his books were very helpful. And he talks about the idea of a fixed schedule productivity. So essentially blocking certain hours in the day where you work, and then after this time passes, that's it. Right. So essentially, you don't really do much work past this time. I think this idea is very, very helpful in terms of like work-life balance. Of course, it comes with a catch that like during the time that you fix the work hours, you really have to, work at very high levels of intensity, right? So this means that you're going to turn off email and you're going to like respond to emails a little later, right? You're going to maybe put a sign on your office outside, like do not disturb, right? So essentially essentially you get to these, you have those block time in your calendar where you do concentrated work with no distractions, so that you can try to like, you don't let work spill, throughout and like take over everything in your life, essentially. So yeah, this is like I hope I kind of touched on those 2 points.
I love those points, and I'm gonna say, you said, you imagine many junior faculty struggling with work-life balance. I imagine so, and I see it with mid-career and even senior faculty. So we have much to learn, I think, in that. And Cal Newport, he's at Georgetown, he's a computer scientist. Aaliyah, do you recommend one of his books over others? He's written like 8 or 9 books.
Yeah. So I really like Deep Work. Deep Work is, I think this is the one that talks mostly about like working with like very intense levels of concentration. And I think it's and I think the other books, so he has another book called Digital Minimalism. It's also talks about like managing digital life in a way that it doesn't really like you restore like the amount of the ability that you have to concentrate and to work in long stretches of time, because a lot of us are affected now by social media, email, and so on. Like sometimes it's very difficult to stay for say an hour without any distractions, doing nothing but like a single concentrated task, like research, for instance, like a specific task in research. So yeah, these are, I think, the 2 ones that I really liked.
Thank you. And I'm going to go back to something you said that is not about this. And I am noting all the questions in the chat, so we'll get to them. Aaliyah, you talked about one of the things you were able to think about focusing on in the year and 4-month postdoc was building a stronger network. Can you talk a little bit about that? How that worked? Was it difficult? How did you manage to do that? Some strategies?
Yeah, sure. So basically, so I did my master's and PhD in the same department with the same supervisors. So so I knew like the people at Waterloo and the department where I did my PhD and master's very well, but I didn't really know so many people outside of that, right? So essentially, in my postdoc, I was able to of course, like work with new people and look at see how they do work maybe very differently, like how they approach research with completely different than like how my PhD and master supervisors did research. So some things may not seem like big differences, but once you actually, the expectations can, it takes time to adapt to their expectations and to understand like essentially how like different literature or different researchers working in slightly different areas can think very differently about one common issue. So I guess so I know this is not really related to the issue of network, but I think this was also important because like working with new people, it doesn't only like mean that like you, of course, like part of it is getting like more references like from and each of those supervisors that you work with will have their own network, people that you meet in conferences and so on. So yeah, I think from for me, the part about building a network was mostly meeting the group of researchers who do somewhat related work at University of Toronto, and knowing them like at a deeper level. So attending their seminars, auditing a couple of lectures for some of the like the very famous names there, and also like meeting their like when we went to conferences, for instance, I got to meet like their network, right? So like my supervisors, some of the collaborators that worked with my supervisors, and also some other collaborators that worked with other faculty members at Rotman. So essentially it's yeah, so being an insider to a department really does give you a lot of leverage to use this network, essentially.
And I think I'm taking from what you're saying is it feels different as a postdoc rather than a PhD student, the ability to leverage that. Yes.
Yes, yes, absolutely, absolutely. Because like a postdoc, you know, you're like, the assumption is you're not in training anymore. You're now just, you're producing essentially. You're of course still like learning new things, but not at the same, it's not the same expectation as a PhD student, right? So the PhD student is in training, they may take a while to pick up some skills, but as a postdoc, like when you go to conferences and so on, and you say like, I work with so and so, then the expectation is like you understand most of the work they do, you're able to carry out research on your own, you may be even helping supervise more junior members of their team and so on.
Great, thank you. And now we have a question in the chat from Catherine, and Catherine has to leave at 1. So I'm gonna interrupt our flow to just put Catherine's question to you. I think she was compelled by what you said, Erin, that you found your postdoc on an Instagram post. And so she's wondering if there's any kind of search that you were doing regularly, and I'll open it up to any of the 3 of you to find potential postdoc opportunities. Of course, there are sites, and I can post some of them in the chat, but is there any other search methods you use to look for postdocs?
Yeah, I mean, so there's also, I'm in psychology, and I think there are some discipline specific ones, but there are psych job wikis where a lot of postdoc positions get posted. I do think LinkedIn is kind of becoming a bit more popular as a place to post things as well. I don't really use LinkedIn, but I think I've heard that some people have success with that. But I would say like it kind of goes hand in hand with Aaliyah's question and answer. I found it on Instagram because someone that I followed on Instagram that I kind of worked with had shared it on their story. And so I was like, oh, it looks good for me. So I think like Twitter used to be a great place for this. I don't, I won't in good conscience recommend Twitter anymore, but I think people like Blue Sky. I'm not on it, but I've heard good things. And so kind of building a network online that isn't even necessarily like a personal network, but people that you follow will often share things. And if you're following people and you're kind of curating your feeds there so that they are specific to your interests, I think that you kind of just come across those things a little bit more easily. Different organizations as well, like if you're part of like for me, Canadian Psychological Association is big, but also more sort of sub-discipline specific organizations. So for me, like the Canadian Sex Research Forum was really relevant to the research I was doing in my PhD. If you're on listservs for a lot of those organizations, they will also often share those posts. And then just kind of like through the sort of network, like if someone that you work with hears from one of their colleagues that they're looking for a postdoc, they might tell you and say, do you want me to recommend you? And you say yes, and there you go. So there is, and I think it's unfortunate. I will also caveat this by saying, like, I think some of this is unfortunate because I think a lot of the time those opportunities are sort of disseminated in inequitable ways, and that can be really challenging. But I think the internet does kind of help to equalize that a little bit. So if you are like, I don't love recommending being on social media, but I do think that that's where a lot of this can come from still.
Thanks, Erin. Ashley, any tips for Catherine and others?
Yeah, I think that was pretty great overview, Erin. Many of the things that I had jotted down to say, you also said. I think a lot of folks, I mean, social media at this point in time is quite fraught based on who owns these platforms. But when we think about social media as a place to find opportunities, I think it's just important to like reemphasize, just as Erin did, that this doesn't necessarily need to be people in your personal network that you're like communicating with and like socializing with on social media, so much as folks who represent different niches in your research field who would be likely to share opportunities that would be relevant to you, right? So you can follow their work and not necessarily have to have like a personal relationship to them, so much as just hope to scoop up what they're putting out, because it would likely be relevant to your work as well.
Great, thank you for that. Aaliyah, anything to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of echo Erin and Ashley's responses. So I think like for me, I got my postdoc through forums for like associations. So I know we have, for example, the Canadian Operations Research Society, and also an international one called Institute for Operations Research and Management Sciences. So these are like very big kind of like societies for people working in those areas. They often have forums where they post positions like that, and I think like there's more awareness now from faculty members that they should try to advertise more widely. So I think these are definitely one like one main way to find out about postdoctoral opportunities. But I think another way is you could, it doesn't of course always work, but you could also like send emails to specific professors that you're looking to, that you may be interested to work with. Sometimes they have opportunities that aren't advertised yet, or sometimes they have like a funding opportunity that has, where the funding hasn't been confirmed yet. So if there's like a couple of people that you really like their work, and you feel like you would love to do a postdoc there, it doesn't really hurt to send an email to ask them if there is an opportunity available.
Yeah, those are all great strategies. And also the idea of a Google alert is great. So hopefully that helped, Catherine. Thanks for the question. And the whole thing with sending sort of cold letters is a great strategy. Be prepared that sometimes you won't get an answer. Unfortunately, that's not a good part of the message here, but sometimes you won't get an answer. I get quite frequently folks reaching out to do a postdoc. I do always answer them and try to direct them maybe to someone who might be in a position to take a postdoc. So, but sometimes you won't necessarily get an answer. So let's shift gears a tiny bit. Aaliyah, you talked about this, and I also want to hear from Erin and Ashley on this. The biggest difference, or some of the differences between doing your PhD and being in a postdoc. So Aaliyah, you talked about sort of more autonomy to maybe take risks, more flexibility, just a different approach to the work without the deadlines and the narrowness, the focus and the specificity of a PhD. Erin, you alluded a bit to this, and Ashley, you talked about all the sort of opening up of the work and the space created, but can you talk a little bit about, for you, what are some of the differences between the PhD and the postdoc experience? And I'll start with you, Ashley.
Yeah, I think I mean that's the major takeaway that I would have. And then, Aaliyah's mentioned quite a few things already that I think are meaningful, so maybe I'll deflect over to you.
Aaliyah, sure. Anything else you want to say on sort of differences between your PhD experience and your postdoc?
Yeah, so yeah, I think you gave a nice summary, Nancy. So I think overall, like the one of the advantages is, of course, like being able to take risks, as I mentioned, right? So exploring new research areas that maybe you didn't have a chance to learn in your PhD. Working with new people, of course, like this gives you different new perspective. New, like more experience. So I think like it's usually not a very good idea to do a postdoc with your PhD advisor as well, right? Because it's essentially you're limiting yourself, you're limiting your the opportunity to gain new perspectives, to work with new people, to explore new methodologies potentially. And of course, like so like the fact that you're already kind of like you've already received your training in your PhD, and now the expectation is you're kind of getting a sense of how it's like to work independently, and how it would feel like when you're running your own lab, for example, or when you're running your own research program. Now, essentially, you're mostly managing your own work. Maybe there could be potentially some opportunities where you can supervise master students, or even like collaborate with PhD students. But like I guess like one of the advantages is you really do get this opportunity to test how it's like to work more independently and be like your own independent researcher. And if this is like an area for you, then maybe this is like a hint that academia could be potentially a path that you explore further.
So the idea of getting warmer and warmer. To use your earlier, it's getting a little warmer. Okay. Erin.
Yeah, I would agree a lot with Ashley and Aaliyah. I think some of this is probably supervisor dependent as well. I've found that my postdoc has been quite a bit more autonomous than my PhD. I think that's partly because my supervisor lets me be a little bit more independent than my PhD supervisor did. But I think there's also it's unstructured, and I think that can be a good or a bad thing. I think for me, it's been a good thing. I'm not super, super deadline driven, but I think for some people that could be really challenging because you don't have the scaffolding of like coursework, and a thesis timeline and these particular milestones that you need to hit. So a postdoc is a lot more wide open, and I think that is workable, but I also think that the real advantage to that is you can kind of curate your experience within the postdoc. So there's the substantive work that you're hired to do, but then you can kind of pick and choose what you want to fill the rest of your time with. So like for some people that might be teaching. For me, I was like, I need a break from teaching. I've taught too much. And so it might be taking other course work, like finding workshops that are sort of related to skills that you want to develop more, or it might be like taking a Coursera course, or it might be kind of like reaching out, doing the kind of networking thing, applying for jobs and grants and things like that. So you have a little bit more control over your time. And that means that you can kind of curate aspects of the experience towards what you want to get out of it a little bit more easily, I think, than I was able to do in my PhD.
Great. I like that idea, the whole idea of curation. I'm going to ask a couple more questions, then we're going to get to the questions in the chat. One question we want to hear, we've heard a lot about sort of the, I think, advantageous differences of the postdoc, the more autonomy, more flexibility, the ability to curate your experience and to try out what an academic, a life in academia might look like. What is a single or more than one, or the biggest challenge you faced during your postdoc, and how did you overcome it? Maybe you're still working to overcome it, but what's a challenge that you would like to talk to folks about? Let's start with you, Ashley.
Sure, yeah. I think the challenge is organizing your time. My postdoc, at least, is very self-directed. And so my supervisor is very interested in hearing the objectives I have and then, listening to the timeline I'd like to set for myself and then letting me do that. His job is accountability sheriff, I guess. And so, yeah, just building your day in a way that is fulfilling to the goals that you've set is such a self-directed challenge. I think a lot of the time we're very used to somebody telling us what our milestones and stretch goals are, what our like key performance indicators are, how we understand whether we're like on track or off track. And because that's all in my case, and I think in a lot of postdocs, set by you, it can feel kind of nebulous. It has the potential to feel kind of nebulous. So my first few months felt nebulous as I was getting my footing, but finding strategies that are best suited for the way that your brain works to set these stretch goals and to set these achievements and to organize your day and like mark the way that you work from the top of the week to the end of the week, I think is like a huge challenge and something that takes a lot of experimenting. And I do think I am like in my rhythm now, but yeah, it's such a privilege to be able to have an open-ended way to organize your time. And we just don't have a lot of roles in our life where that's the case. And so having one all of a sudden you can feel unprepared for the amount of like self-directed energy it takes to make the most out of that time. So it's a challenge, and I think it's a great challenge, and also a great opportunity to do research to find out how other people who have open-ended blocks of time to work on their research have decided to organize that. So it's kind of cool and fun to cherry pick all of these methodologies and then determine what best suits your functioning. So that's a big challenge.
Yeah, and that's, I think, a ubiquitous challenge even for new faculty. I remember as a new faculty member, I was teaching 3 courses a semester, and I knew I had to be there that time. And the world was different. We were always in the office as opposed to now. We were in our office, but I'd be there from 8 to 6, and I would be teaching my classes and prepping and doing my research. But then there'd be these periods of time where I'm like, okay, no one's telling me what to do. I've got to figure this out. There weren't many of those stretches because there was always stuff to do, and committee work and things, but the postdoc does allow that. And for some folks that might be actually really challenging, as you've described, like but a positive challenge, right? So as you said, learning from others. Erin, for you, your challenge.
Yeah, I mean, one of the challenges that I think we'll probably talk about, but there is uncertainty. Like, for example, you don't know if, for me, I'm going to be dependent on whether or not I get a fellowship grant from Tri-Council, which is not a good place to be. So there is kind of that challenge of like, what do I do at this time when this conceivably ends? And what does that look? You kind of have to have 3 backup plans, which is what I've had to do. And that sucks, like that it's not a stable position. And I think that is a lot of the reason why people would avoid doing a postdoc, is because financially it's tough because you can't really plan for too many years in advance. But the other challenge I would say has kind of been, and this wouldn't be a challenge for everyone. And so I would say if you can avoid it being a challenge, do. I had a lot of stuff that I dragged with me out of graduate school. So I had a couple of publications that were kind of halfway done and still needed to be finished. Some other chapters that I had committed to writing, things like that weren't related to my postdoc, but I still felt the obligation to do. So I carried a lot of work with me, and it's been challenging to find time for that because it's not my priority right now. So kind of prioritizing what is part of the postdoc versus what isn't part of the postdoc is tough as well.
Yeah, that seems like a common theme, is figuring that out. And when you're already bringing things left over, quote unquote, from your PhD, that could feel additionally burdensome. Aaliyah, for you, your challenge.
Yeah, so I think Ashley and Aaron mentioned like some of the challenges I faced as well. I would add to that, basically, if you're exploring a new area in your postdoc, then there is like essentially there's also this pressure to publish, essentially, right? So like managing or like finding the right trade-off between like how much should you invest in learning new things versus should you just use what you already know to produce more, I guess, like publications I can take into the market. So these are like very tough trade-offs, right? So for example, I did my postdoc in a methodology that I didn't really know anything about in my PhD, and I remember like I was telling someone like at Waterloo that I'm going to use this methodology, and they told me, no, this is very difficult. It's not that easy to pick. And it definitely was, right? So there were like periods where like a few months after I started my postdoc, I was wondering if I made the right call, right? Because I was really doing a lot of reading, a lot of researching, and I wasn't really getting my project wasn't moving very smoothly. So essentially, the trade-off between like using what you already know versus learning new things is not a very easy trade-off, right? But of course, like you don't want to stick with just the things that you already learned during your PhD, because that would be limiting to your growth. You want to build like a stronger resume and so on. So you definitely want to take some risk. Yeah, I guess like I'll also echo what Aaron said with respect to uncertainty. So I guess the uncertainty with what comes next is definitely one of the main disadvantages of a postdoc, especially because unfortunately I think like I got this feeling a lot as a PhD and a postdoc. And I hope that like now when I'm supervising students, I really try my best to try not to make them feel that way. But sometimes in academia, it feels like that if you're leaving academia, you're quitting. Right? There are a lot of opportunities out there, like a lot of amazing things that you can do outside of academia with the skills that you learn, even if they're not directly applied. So it's not really a waste if you decide to diverge and explore new things and, you know, put academia behind you and open a new chapter. So I think like when it comes to uncertainty, I think the advice that I would give is like give yourself like a time limit, right? So say, for instance, I'm going to do a postdoc for 2 and 3 years max, and then after that, if things don't work out in academia, then I'm going to transition, right? So this way, essentially, and while doing that, of course, like if you think academia is the right choice for you, of course, do your best to build your academic resume, but also explore other opportunities, right? It's there are, like, I know a lot of friends who ended up outside academia and they're living like a perfectly happy life, right? And some of them are actually using a lot of the skills they learned in their PhD. So I have a couple of friends that work in Amazon in the research as research scientists there. They definitely need a PhD for that. So yeah, there is definitely so many opportunities out there. So like, I guess a way to manage the uncertainty that comes with a postdoc is to remind yourself that if you don't end up in academia, that's definitely not the end of the world. There's so many good routes that you can choose to pursue.
Thanks, Aaliyah. And it's great to hear your approach to supervision. We have a lot to learn there too. So I'm gonna jump to the questions in the chat because we have engaged folks here and I don't want to miss their questions. And we have 10 or a bit more time. So Annie, if you're here, you're welcome to give your question. I don't know if you're still here. I can read it.
I am, sorry.